Hello friends, once again on behalf of DM tutorial, I welcome all of you to this episode of my series of tutorial videos. Today's subject is economics and the topic is indifference curve. Now I would request you to be prepared with pen and paper so that you can jot down the main points of my lecture and also carefully watch and draw yourself the graphs I am drawing, the equations and calculations I am making in my hard copy. Okay, so let's start indifference curve technique. Now, indifference curve technique is a critical chapter of microeconomics in understanding consumers' behavior, consumers' equilibrium, which ultimately leads to explanation of theory of demand. As we have discussed in the last video, that law of equimarginal utility has been challenged on various grounds. Say for example, the law of diminishing marginal utility has been challenged. The constancy of marginal utility of money has been challenged, and the equality between price of a commodity and marginal utility of a commodity has been challenged. To overcome these difficulties, Allen and Hicks have developed a new technique to explain, to understand, to analyze consumers' behavior and to reach consumers' equilibrium through a technique called indifference curve technique. Now, before we start discussing on indifference curve, let's see what are the assumptions of indifference curve. As all of us know, every theory is based on certain assumptions, and in some point of time, some assumptions of some theories have been challenged by many economists. Whatever be the case, the indifference curve theory also depends on certain assumptions. Now, what are the assumptions? The first assumption is the consumer has complete knowledge of his scale of preference. That means the consumer clearly knows which commodity gives him better satisfaction or better utility related to another commodity, or which combination of two commodities gives the consumer better satisfaction or better utility related to another commodity, another combination consisting of two commodities. And the consumer can change from one commodity to another commodity, or from one combination of two commodities to another combination of two commodities. Okay, this is the first assumption. The second assumption is called non-satiety. What non-satiety means? It is assumed that the consumer always expects positive utility by consuming one additional unit. That means the consumer always prefers more to less. Say for example, if a person is given a choice to pick a box among two boxes containing chocolates. Now one box contains 2 chocolates and another box contains 5 chocolates. Now the person is given a choice to choose one of the boxes without paying any money. So what he or she will do? He will choose the box that contains 4 chocolates instead of choosing that box which contains 2 chocolates, isn't it? So this is natural human behavior. You should remember that most of the microeconomic theories are based on rationality of human beings. That is, it is assumed that human beings behave rationally. From rationality behavior, it can be said that more is always preferred to less. The third assumption is continuity or transitivity. Now, what continuity or transitivity means? This is also derived from rational behavior of consumer. Say for example, if a consumer prefers situation A to situation B, and prefers situation B to situation C, then he must be preferring situation A to situation C. In the same way, if a consumer prefers combination A to combination B and prefers combination B to combination C, remember each combination contains two goods, then he certainly prefers combination A to combination C. Okay. And the last assumption is the marginal rate of substitution between two commodities go on falling. As we have seen in the last video, that law of equimarginal utility has been considered as a basis of discussing consumers' behavior and consumers' equilibrium. In the same way, in indifference curve technique, the law of diminishing marginal rate of substitution is the basis of analyzing indifference curve. Now, what is law of diminishing marginal rate of substitution? What is the rate of substitution? Rate of substitution means the rate at which a consumer sacrifices one commodity to acquire additional unit of another commodity. Okay, so I will request you to concentrate on my hard copy, where I am deriving your marginal rate of substitution, which ultimately becomes the indifference curve. Please be prepared with a pen and paper. Look at this table. Table of indifference schedule. Suppose the consumer is consuming two fruits, apples and mangoes, which give him or her satisfaction or utility. Now the consumer is thinking consciously, judiciously and rationally, and he or she is able to make many combinations of two fruits, each of which gives the consumer same level of satisfaction. So this is combination 1, combination 2, combination 1, combination 2, combination 3 and combination 4. This is number of apples. 15, 11, 8, 6, and in the fifth combination it is 5. And in this column we write number of mangoes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now this is the combination, that is 15 units of apples and 1 unit of mango. This is the combination. Another combination is 11 and 2. Another combination 8 and 3. Another combination 6 and 4. Another combination 5 and 5. Okay. So the consumer is indifferent between each of these combinations. That means each combination gives the consumer same level of satisfaction. Now you can see that as the consumer goes on acquiring more of mangoes, he has to sacrifice the number of apples he had been consuming. In this column we write MRS, that is marginal rate of substitution. So here we can see that he has sacrificed 4 apples to acquire 1 mango, because number of apples has increased from 15 to 11, that is 4, and number of mangoes has increased from 1 to 2, that is 1. So MRS is 4:1. In this stage, the consumer acquires 1 more mango by sacrificing 3 apples So the ratio is 3:1. Here it is 2:1. Here it is 1:1. This is called marginal rate of substitution. Now you can see that the marginal rate of substitution is falling as the consumer is consuming one commodity by one additional units. Now why this is happening? In the first stage, the consumer was consuming 15 apples and 1 mango. That means utility of 1 unit of apple was less compared to utility of 1 unit of mango, because number of apples is more than number of mangoes, and as you know, more you consume, less is the utility you derive from the commodity. So he is prepared to sacrifice 4 units of apples to acquire 1 unit of mango. Now in this stage, his number of apples has fallen from 15 to 11 and number of mangoes has increased from 1 to 2. That means his utility from apples has increased a little bit because his stock of apples has fallen. On the other hand, since stock of mangoes has increased from 1 to 2, utility of mango has fallen. Okay. In this case, since the number of mangoes has fallen from 15 to 11, his utility from apple has increased and utility of mango has fallen. Since his utility from apple has increased in this stage compared to this stage, now if he wants to acquire 1 more apple, then he is prepared to sacrifice only 3 units of apple instead of 4 units which he was doing previously. In this stage, his stock of apple has increased from fallen from 11 to 8, and his stock of mango has increased from 2 to 3. So his utility from apple has increased and utility from mango has fallen. So in this stage, if he once again wants to consume 1 more mango, then he is prepared to sacrifice only 2 units of apples. So MRS becomes 2:1. In this stage, it becomes 1:1. Now if you draw a figure, it will be a downward sloping curve like this. On y-axis, we are measuring number of apples, and on x-axis we are measuring number of mangoes. The first combination is 15:1, so this is 15 and this is 1. The second combination is 11:2, so this is 11, this is 2, and third one is 8:3, so this is 3 and this is 3 and this is 8. Okay, and this is 4 and this is 6. This is 5 and this is 5. So you can see, if we mark these points as P, Q, R, S and T, as the consumer goes down P to T, he is sacrificing some apples to acquire additional unit of mangoes. In this case, the sacrifice of apple is delta Y and acquisition of mangoes is delta X. Here this is delta Y and this is delta x. So MRS of mango for apple is equal to delta y by delta x, which goes down, that is downward sloping. This downward arrow indicates downward sloping. So this curve is basically known as indifference curve. Okay. Now one thing must be noted very, very carefully, that although the curve is downward sloping, it is not sufficient. The curve must be convex to the origin. As you see, the curve is convex to the origin. It cannot be concave to the origin. Why it cannot be concave to the origin, I am explaining here. We draw a concave indifference curve like this. This is also downward sloping, but it is concave to the origin. Now, if we see what is happening to MRS, let's see what is actually coming out. Now on this axis, this is quantity of x, here it is quantity of y. This is P, this is Q, this is R, this is S, this is T. As the consumer moves down P to T, he sacrifices y to acquire one additional unit of x. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, let's see what is the amount of sacrifice and what is the amount of gain. When he moves from P to Q, he sacrifices this much of y to gain this much of x. When he moves from Q to R, he sacrifices this much of y and this much of, and gains this much of x. As he moves from R to S, he consumes this much, that is, he gains this much and sacrifices this much. Again from S to T, the sacrifice is this much and gain is this much. So this is delta y and this is delta x. You can see the length of delta y is getting bigger and bigger in every successive combination. So here delta y by delta x, here delta y by delta x goes up, which goes against the law. That is, that here the marginal rate of substitution of x for y goes on increasing, which is not expected from a rational person. Okay, so once again you concentrate on my lecture instead on my hard copy. Now we are coming to define indifference curve. What is indifference curve? Indifference curve is the locus of all the combinations of two commodities which gives the consumer same level of satisfaction individually. That means the consumer is indifferent between all those commodities. Now, since the consumer has a scale of preference in his mind, he can think consciously, judiciously, and rationally. He knows which combination of two commodities gives him or her more satisfaction. Now, I am going to draw indifference curve and indifference map. Indifference map is nothing but a collection of indifference curves. Now, one thing you must keep in your mind, that please don't bring in any monetary constraint while we are discussing consumer's behavior, because it is assumed that the consumer is a rational person and the consumer behaves rationally. Okay. Now, how we should judge rationality? A person may prefer to live in a mud house to living in a palace. So he is not irrational because this is his choice. But if a person goes to a shop to purchase a shirt and comes back purchasing a pair of jeans, expecting that the jeans will serve him the purpose of shirt, then the person is behaving irrationally. Okay? So don't bring in any monetary constraint. This is a matter of choice. What commodity, what combination a rational person chooses. Okay? Now please once again look at my hard copy. Here I am drawing the indifference curve and indifference map. Here you have seen one indifference schedule by which we have drawn one indifference curve. Now we can have many such schedules and each schedule will lead to a single indifference curve. So if this is the combination of 15 and 1, we can have another combination of say 16 and 2, another combination and another indifference curve. So all these curves taken together are called indifference map. Okay, now listen very carefully. This is IC1, that is indifference curve 1. This is IC2, that is indifference curve 2. This is IC3, that is indifference curve 3. And this is IC4, that is indifference curve 4. Now see, each of the curves is away from the other. And no curve touches or intersects any other curve. You see, all these points on IC1 give the consumer same level of satisfaction. Okay, and all these points on a higher indifference curve IC2 again give the consumer same level of satisfaction. So this combination gives the consumer more satisfaction than this point gives. Why? Because this point denotes more of both the commodities than this point, which denotes lesser of both the commodities. Since more is always preferred to less, the consumer will prefer to live here rather than living here. Okay? In the same way, all the points on indifference curve 3 gave the consumer same amount of satisfaction. That means the consumer is indifferent between all the points on this indifference curve, that is IC3. There are innumerable points on any indifference curve. There are innumerable points means that there can be innumerable combination of two goods X and Y. And this point or this combination gives the consumer greater satisfaction than this point gives. That means the consumer will prefer to live at this point than this point. Why? Because this point denotes more of Y and more of X compared to this point. So, higher the indifference curve, higher the satisfaction of the consumer. So, this is all about marginal rate of substitution and indifference curve. So, once again, I will request you to listen to my lecture where I am summarizing what I have taught you today. In the last video, you have seen that there are a lot of loopholes in the law of equimarginal utility in analyzing and describing consumers' behavior and consumers' equilibrium. That drawbacks have been challenged by many economists, and Professor Hicks and Professor Allen have developed a new technique called indifference curve technique to overcome the difficulties of law of equimarginal utility and explain, describe and analyze consumer behavior and consumer equilibrium in a more mature way, and to make the analysis of theory of demand more plausible and more realistic. Now, indifference curve means a locus of all the points. Each point denotes a combination containing two commodities which give the consumer equal level of satisfaction. That means all the combinations are equally preferable to the consumer. The consumer has no incentive to shift from one point to another. Okay, this is indifference curve. And indifference curve is based on certain assumptions. What are the assumptions? The assumptions are that the non-satiety of one, that mode is always preferred to less, and the consumer behaves rationality, that is consistency and transitivity. If consumer prefers A to B and prefers B to C, and then he certainly prefers A to C, the consumer has a complete knowledge about his scale of preferences, and the marginal rate of substitution between two commodities go on falling when the consumer go on consuming one commodity by one additional unit. The sacrifice of the other commodity goes on falling. That is, the marginal rate of substitution of X for Y goes on decreasing as the consumer go on increasing his purchase of increasing purchase of X by sacrificing his purchase of Y. Okay, and indifference curve is a downward sloping curve, and it is also convex to the origin. Had it been concave to the origin, in that case the marginal rate of substitution, that is MRS, would have been rising instead of falling. It would go against the law. That is, the law says that the marginal rate of substitution will go on falling as the consumer goes on substituting one commodity for the other. It should be remembered that marginal rate of substitution, MRS, is also based on the law of diminishing marginal utility as was developed by Professor Marshall. Okay, I hope you have enjoyed this video. I would request you to develop queries in your mind. I will be enriched if you send queries and valuable suggestions. I will try to improve these videos as per your queries and as per your suggestions, which are very valuable to me. So please be in touch through the comment box. Thank you for watching this video. Bye.